Hello all, now obviously as I am talking about a campaign game on this review, I thought I would just make this 100% crystal clear, okay? Because I don't want to get into the can on this one. I am talking about a campaign game. The first part of this review will be spoiler free, okay? A short overview of the game and the expansion, and just that will do. Then I will make it clear that I'm going into spoiler territory, alright? All you have to do is watch for this message, okay? And in case that wasn't enough of a clue for you, I'll add in a few more.
Everybody got that?
Hello and welcome to the Broken Meeple for an actual review. Yeah, it has been a while since I've done a game review, hasn't it? Well, August and July just tends to have no games released, which is kind of weird. You'd think with Gen Con there'd be a ton of games coming out, but they tend to take a while before they release after Gen Con, around about this time. In fact, as I record this of the 31st of August 2018, this week and next week's releases actually have some cool stuff there. But the last 3 or 4 weeks, there's just been very little. Except for one game. And that is this. Oh yes. Scythe, Rise of Fenris. If you've been paying attention to the Top 100 in previous years, you know that I'm a big fan of Scythe. And, you know, the expansions to Scythe so far have been pretty solid. We've had the Invaders from Afar, and we've had the Wind Gambit. Both are great, both are worth getting, and both are modular. This, though, wow, did the hype train set sail for that one. Because this one said it was going to bring in an 8-episode campaign with more modules that once you have used them in the campaign, or even without playing the campaign, you can introduce them into your normal games of Scythe. So it was basically a story-driven campaign for Scythe. Yeah, need we say more? Suffice to say, I was certainly pleased to get this one to review. Now, obviously, as I said at the start, this will be spoiler-free for the moment, and then I will go into spoiler territory to talk about my favourite particular aspects of the expansion. But for now, for those of you who want to avoid the spoilers, rest assured I'm not going to go any. I'm just going to explain kind of how the campaign works, what you can do if you don't want the campaign, what is separate from the campaign, and just generally what kind of experience you're going to get after playing through the entire 8 episodes. So, 8 episodes? Yeah, it's basically 8 games of Scythe that you will play, as they will introduce the modules, or the different rules that are integrated in this expansion, step by step. And, you know, when you trigger these, depends on your choices throughout the campaign. So with the story aspect, this is effectively taking place after the Wind Gambit. If you imagine that you already have, you know, the 2 extra factions and airships to go on to, then you can basically say that this is now taking place after that. It talks about in detail, in a lot of detail actually, about the Great War and how that happened. So if you're interested in a bit of history into how the universe in this game was portrayed, then by all means read the backstory in the book. But what will happen is that you will go through 8 games of which there is a little bit of backstory in each one, you know, probably about half a page worth of small text, and then you will play the game and then there'll be a little bit of extra text afterwards for reading. Not too much, so don't worry, this isn't one of those games where you've got to spend hours reading out to various players. No, you're talking a bunch of paragraphs, enough to give you a story arc, but not to bore you to death if the story is not what you're desperate for. And then each game will proceed much like a normal game of Scythe, but with additional elements again that I won't spoil for now. There are certain choices that you can make throughout the campaign to diverge paths, and that doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen, you know, a couple of times during the campaign, and it's fun to discover the new things that you unlock as the game progresses. Because the game is packaged in such a way, much like a typical legacy game, where things come in boxes or on punch boards. Now, suffice to say, you need to be a bit careful when you open this stuff up, because the stuff in boxes is easy to keep secret, but the punch boards aren't. The punch boards are kind of there for you to see. It's not like they're covered in They really should have maybe covered them in foil or something, maybe just to like completely disguise them and then put a number on them. But nah, they're open punch boards, just like when you open a game up. So you'll be unpacking the game and going, oh yeah, let's look at all these bits, let's look at these bits. And then suddenly you notice a punch board and it has something on it and you go, and you've pretty much spoiled it yourself. It's a little bit annoying in that respect, but you don't necessarily know how it's going to play in the campaign or what context it has until you get it introduced to you properly. So it's a bit of an annoyance that they couldn't have covered these punch boards with something to really disguise the fact that they are spoilerific. But it's not the end of the world if you do see one or two of them. All you got to do is just basically go in with the knowledge that you should ideally, the only thing that you should take out of this box is the book. A spiral-bound book that has all the scenarios in it, the rules of how to use the various elements, and the way the modules can work in a normal game of Scythe. That book is what you need. Other than that, you should probably just completely ignore everything in this box until the book tells you to. That's the best way you're going to avoid any spoilers. The extra modules themselves that are added are all pretty entertaining. In fact, you do not need to play through this campaign to introduce them. There are rules at the back of the book that explain how to integrate these modules into your normal game of Scythe. Now, typically when you get these modules, you'll kind of think, well, I don't really want to use those, they were a bit naff, but I will use these all the time. With this one, I think at least 3/4 of the modules you will use in every game of Scythe from that point forward. There's some that are kind of more subjective, you can use them every now and again, but you won't necessarily make them like usable all the time. But some of them in here, oh yes. We've been crying out for these kind of things, and now it's like, if I bring my copy of Scythe to the game club, we're using these modules. End of story. Even if I'm teaching the new players, we are using these modules. They are that big of an improvement, and certainly you won't say no once you've tried them out for yourself. The experience of the actual campaign is mainly just like playing the game of Scythe 8 times. You do, however, get some cool discovery elements though. If you think you've played Pandemic Legacy before, you know what it's like when you come across certain plot points and certain things like midway through a game and they kind of like make you go, whoa, okay, there are some of those moments here. Not loads, I will admit, but the ones that you do get are pretty cool when they happen. They are worth every penny when you get to those moments. But yeah, it's not like it's going to shock you loads every single, campaign. It's more like, I'd probably compare it maybe to the plot arc in Charterstone, but a bit more interesting and a little bit more going on. Because in Charterstone, did you really care too much about the plot that was going on in that one? Here, you care a bit more about the plot, particularly if you're a fan of Scythe like me. But yeah, it's not like this is an engaging narrative story that that you must be completely immersed in. Now, if you go into this just wanting to play 8 games of Scythe, but with tweaks, you're gonna get a pretty good enjoyment out of this anyway. That's what we did. We played through 8 full games of Scythe to go through this campaign, and like I say, I've never played so many games of Scythe in such a short period, and I loved every single one of them. They certainly do feel very different, a lot of the episodes themselves. You'll play through one episode and you'll do stuff similar to the normal game, and then you'll play through another episode where suddenly it's like, wow, okay, the objective that you're trying to do is actually quite different. Should I do what I normally do, or should I go for this instead? You have choices. And the game encourages you to be diverse in your playstyles. Sometimes you get a faction and you think, right, well, I'm playing the red faction. I'm just going to play like this all the time because it works. If you want to do well in this campaign, it encourages you to occasionally diversify. And the objectives that you end up doing in certain episodes do encourage you to do something a bit outside the norm. So if you want to munchkin the same thing that you do all the time, you will eventually hit a roadblock where you won't gain any extra particular benefit for it. So, most games I don't find myself getting to the highest 18 popularity level. But here, it's kind of like, yeah, at some point I do actually need to start trying to get myself to be popular, regardless of what faction I'm playing. And like I say, everything works smoothly. The rules are pretty straightforward. As you're reading the book, it explains how it works, what to do in the outcome. And I never had a point where I was reading anything and going, hang on, that doesn't quite make sense. What do I do? Never had to look up an FAQ. Never had to go online to a board game community and avoid, reading spoilers. Now, everything is pretty crystal clear in this box. In terms of storage, that's a little bit more tricky. If you have just got a normal collector's box of Scythe, you might struggle to fit all this in the box depending on what you've used to store it before. I know that's a bit vague, but if you've not used a custom insert, then maybe you'll fit it fine. If you've used a broken token or similar wooden insert, then chances are it's not fully compatible with this, but you might be able to squeeze things around it. And certainly you do have some means to store them by way of the boxes that you open in here, just don't destroy them. But if, like me, you've got the legendary box, you know, that huge thing with a big lid and that, then you should be able to find a way to store everything in that one box. But then you paid for that box, so you'd hope so, right? So that's really all I can talk about without going into spoilers. And I really want to get to the spoilers. But in terms of this expansion, if you are a fan of Scythe, get this expansion. This is a new lease of life to what is already a fantastic game. It is not as perfect as I would like, and I feel that maybe some extra stuff could have been included, you know, in terms of spicing up the campaign a little bit, or maybe like, okay, we kind of wanted these to be added to the game. Is there nothing else you could add to the game? And also the co-op variant. This is separate from the campaign. You can play this fully co-op now with this expansion, and it's alright. I don't think it's amazing, the co-op version. Basically what happens is that you have a faction that's controlled by AI effectively, and all the rest of you are doing your thing with your boards and in your areas getting resources, but you're working collaboratively. So you can spend each other's resources, you can be on the same tile as other people, you can help each other in combat, and you're basically trying to stop this faction from taking over together. You know, and the faction's like fairly powerful, so you've got to work together and complete global objectives. It's fine. I don't think it's the best thing ever. I feel that most people who get this are just going to still play Scythe competitively. However, one thing it does do is introduces a bit more player interaction. Some people will always fault Scythe about, oh yeah, you don't tend to see much of the other players, you know, you don't really, it's multiplayer solitaire to an extent, and even though I don't believe that entirely, there is some truth to it in particularly like the first half of the game. With the co-op version though, you're working together, you're talking with each other, you're discussing what you're going to do, so suddenly the player interaction is stepped up to a high level. So if that's what's missing from your game of Scythe, you know, that otherwise you would love it if it just were for a bit more player interaction, then consider this with the co-op variant and you may just get your wish. For me, it's a decent variant, but probably not one that I'm going to be playing loads. For me, it's all about that 8-episode campaign that was really cool, and the fact that some of these modules, in fact most of these modules, are going to get used in every single game of Scythe. That is how good they are. So, final rating for this, you know, my personal rating, I would give this probably as high as a 9. This is solid for, you know, this is an expansion I've been looking forward to. I loved the campaign. I loved the discoveries that I made in it. I like the modules. The vast majority of those modules I will use in every single game. An expansion like that deserves a lot of credit. If anything, the only flaws is that, one, you've got to worry about spoilers when you're opening it with those punch boards, and secondly, the co-op variant, which I was kind of looking forward to being really good, is alright. Not fantastic. So, you know, it drops a mark in my personal rating for that, but I'm glad I've got it, and frankly, as I said, if you like Scythe and you want more content, get this expansion. I would almost say even, you know, make Invaders from Afar the last expansion you get now. The Wind Gambit is very good. I highly recommend it. Invaders from Afar is basically 2 factions. If you want more factions, great, but you could happily just not get them. I would certainly consider getting the Wind Gambit, then possibly this one, or switch the order around, and then worry about Invaders. Although on a note with that, this is fully compatible with Invaders. It is also fully compatible with the Wind Gambit. However, you do not have to use the Wind Gambit. The campaign gives you choices as to whether you want to use certain aspects of the Wind Gambit expansion. So if you don't have the Wind Gambit, don't worry. You can play through this entire campaign without ever caring about airships or endgame objective tiles. So don't think that you have to purchase the 2 before it to get this one. You could jump straight into this expansion if you like, and you're on your way. So that's it for the non-spoiler section. So just for a little warning, as mentioned before. There you go. Hope that made it perfectly clear. If you want to avoid spoilers, then turn this video off right now, and thanks for watching. See you next time. So, spoilers. Whew. Wow. Some of the stuff you find in here. I mean, let's talk about some of the individual modules that I really like. Firstly, Mech and infrastructure mods. You now have ways to customize your faction even more by using mech mods that you can replace your various mech abilities with, and infrastructure mods that you can have as kind of one-off bonuses that you can use and only you use in your faction. And these are pretty powerful. You know, the infrastructure mods, you might be able to do an enlist action for no food. That could be a massive step up in the early game if you're like, oh, I could really do with that bonus nice and early. Oh wait, I can do it that way. Now you take them randomly from a bag and you'll choose so many of them and then you have them in every game. There's a lot of them. There's like 30 something plus of each of these types. You only draw about what, like 4 to 8 of them in a game, and you choose only so many. So the variety and the replay value has been upped considerably as a result of these mods. The mech mods are kind of more hit and miss. Some of the ones that involve combat are only going to be useful to you if you actually plan to go into combat during your game. But there's certainly plenty of decent cool things to increase your movement capacity, to up your combat ability, or even just to give you some weird funky abilities that you can use on your mech. And the fact that you have to cover up ones that you do makes it really tense decision at the start of the game. It's like, oh, I can move on lakes now and do this, but do I really want to give up Riverwalk? Or should I just rely on this? And ooh, I can zap power from the opponent, and ooh, I can actually leap across things. You know, there's some really cool mods that you can use. They're very simple to learn, and they come up very early in the campaign. However, which one you use depends entirely on whether you want to go war or peace after the first section. That was quite an interesting little thing at the end of the first game where you've got to vote on, you know, whether you want to go war and peace for the next scenario. And it happens twice. There's 2 occasions where you can go down path A or path B depending on what you've done. We went down the peace route. In fact, me and someone else completely outvoted the only person who wanted to go down war. But personally, we would have been perfectly fine if we'd done either or. It's not like one is less enjoyable than the other. So the other like really cool things in it, 2 more factions. Yes, 2 more factions. Yes, I wanted more factions. Yes, I know we've got them pre-printed on the board, but I wanted a way to get even more factions in with some really weird abilities. Hello, Hello Tesla? Or what are they called? Vesna. Hello Vesna and hello Fenris. Oh yes, these factions are great fun and they're so different. My favourite is definitely Vesna by a mile. Fenris is cool though. That moment when you open up that little box in the middle of one campaign, it's like, okay, fine, you got to the factory, what is it? What is that thing? There's this giant walking monstrosity comes out, and that's the mechs for Fenris. They are these huge walking things, a bit like something you would get out of Half-Life or something, you know, a big strider-like thing on 2 legs. They're called Annihilators, and they are awesome looking mechs. They just tower over everything. They're as tall as the airships that you use. That's how big they are. They look so imposing compared to the other mechs. You know, the other mechs look like babies compared to these things. And Fenris is very much the fanatical society. It's slowish, unless you use the abilities. They never get a speed boost, but they have abilities that allow them to pretty much warp across the map. And that can be pretty powerful, but you've got to set yourself up for it. And they have some very good combat abilities as well, and their board is slightly different for enlist bonuses because they're not going to be very popular. But they're certainly going to have the combat resources and the wealth to get those Annihilators up and running and in your face. They're a really cool faction to use, if only just so that you can use those really cool orange mechs and you want to get them out. But Vesna, oh by a mile, I love Vesna. It's basically the Tesla faction, the daughter of Nikola Tesla, and these are basically the cyber tech faction. In fact, I'm not entirely certain what the animal is on the little miniature, but it looks like a fox. It looks more like a dog on the picture on the map board, but it's a fox. It looks more like a fox in the miniature. But whatever you want to call it, cyber dog or cyber fox, it's basically a cyber thing. It looks really cool. And Vesna herself looks like a pretty cool miniature as well. The mechs are a little bit weird. They're not my favourite design for mechs. But the thing I love about Vesna though, the ability to customize your mechs and those factory cards you get at the start. Basically, she has 2 cool abilities about their faction. Firstly, you have 2 blank spots for mech mods. You draw from a separate bag of mods for the mechs, and what you can do is choose between 2 to 4 of them to customize what mechs you'll have for the game. The replay value for this faction is insane just based on that. let alone everything else you do in the game. So you can have whatever combination of mech abilities you want, whatever you fancy doing in the game. And you'll always get at least 2 different ones, but the 2 printed ones you have, you could just happily replace those as well. So you've got excellent customizable ability with this faction. The other thing I love is the factory card bonus she gets. She only gets to use each factory card once, but she starts off with 3 random ones at the start of the game. That's pretty powerful. She doesn't start with much in the way of other resources. I mean, 1 combat card, 1 power, you know, some of her stats are quite low to compensate. But I love having 3 factory cards at the start. Yeah, it's a lucky dip. You might get 3 that aren't necessarily the ones you really like, but they allow you to do a double move. Don't knock the ability to use a double move sometimes. And like I say, some of these factory cards are able to get you a lot of money, a lot of popularity, or even just insta-build something. Do not underestimate that. But when you use one, it goes away. One-shot only factory cards. So she's basically everything I want in a faction. Tech, variety, customizable. I love Vesna faction. She is easily the best thing in this box. Certainly for me anyway. May not be for others, but for me, I want to play that Vesna faction as much as humanly possible. She's just so much fun to use. The customizable Triumph tiles are another fantastic addition. You've got that War and Peace Triumph track that you could use, but ideally, you want to use those customizable Triumph tiles. Oh, fantastic, because, you know, some people would comment, oh, you always just get 6 stars and it's always the same objectives. Now you can customize that track, and you've got other things like, you know, getting popularity, getting encounters, getting, you know, combat cards in your hand, getting loads of resources. You can customize that Triumph track as much as you like now in every game, so your objectives are always different. Such a simple change, but makes such a huge difference in replayability. And that's one reason why this expansion is generally so good. It ups the replay value of Scythe tremendously. You know, I was touting whether to give it a 10, but I had to decide that, you know, 8 episodes, you've got to commit to it, and not everybody wants to commit to a game, and the fact that the co-op variant was kind of meh, you know, dropped it to 9, but it was so close to a 10, honestly. It's almost pretty much a must-buy. But yeah, you know, adjusting the Triumph track, brilliant. You know, again, more replay value. If there's anything about some of these modules I'm not a fan of, or at least not like desperate for, it was the ability to put in the mad version of Tesla in there. You know, like the sort of mad doctor and his gyroscope vehicle. It's alright, but I'm not exactly desperate to use him. It's another bit of a fiddly rule that you kind of have to explain, but it's nice to have a little NPC character essentially running around the board and causing havoc, or being on your side if necessary. But yeah, it's not something that I'm desperate to use in every game. Pretty much I am desperate to use those infrastructure and mech mods, I am desperate to use the Triumph tile replacements, and I'm desperate to use the 2 new factions. The other stuff aside, you don't need to worry too much about. You know, they're decent, but they're not like, you know, the amazing thing. But those, oh, I guess I love them so much. And the campaign itself was, like I said, good fun to play. I enjoyed the discovery aspect. I mean, the first time you realise, oh, you can get mods, fantastic, this is what we want. I like the way that 2 scenarios make you go down a different path. But the best surprise ever was, second best was seeing Tesla. I thought, you know, that weird little miniature you got, it's like, okay, that's pretty cool, the guy on his gyroscope. But as soon as that Annihilator appeared, that was the highlight. You know, somebody beat me to get into the factory first, and I was like, I want you to get there. He literally flew in a worker on an airship to get into the factory. And then he opens the box. What the? You see this giant Annihilator mech in there. And then it stands up and then it's like, right, you've got to beat it, and it gets a pretty tough as nails defense against you. Yeah, your worker's going back to the start. Thank you for unleashing this upon us, you moron. But it made for a really good twist in the scenario, because it happens midway. I love these things that twist the scenario when you get halfway through, and I do wish that maybe more scenarios did that, but, you know, that was definitely the highlight to trigger that Annihilator. And finally, before I wrap up, the last module to talk about, alliances. I wasn't as huge a fan of this. It plays it up in the book a bit more, you know, about, oh yeah, now you can have a formal sense of diplomacy. pretty much all you're doing is swapping abilities and, you know, like saying you can use my ability, you can use my ability, and then there's rules about not attacking that other player. Aside from that, it's about as weak as the diplomacy system in Rising Sun. I love that game, but you have to admit, they hyped up the diplomacy factor in that game way too much. Here, you read the word alliances and you think, oh yeah, cool, I can do this cool diplomacy thing. And it is mainly just deciding which players and at what time you want to trade abilities. And that's kind of really it. There's not a massive... They don't have as big of an impact as I would have liked in the game. I don't know how you would introduce a formal diplomacy system in here, but it's a nice little touch, and to be honest, it's a straightforward addition. You just basically throw in the tokens and that's it. They pretty much are the same abilities that you have on your faction board anyway, so there's not much to explain really. So they're pretty much an auto-include, I just wish they had more of an impact. So that's it for spoilers. You know, I've spoiled enough in the campaign, but honestly, it was a great expansion, it was a great experience, and as I said before, if you like Scythe, you owe it to yourself to get this expansion. It's totally worth it. So that's it from me. I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple episode, whether that's a top 10 or another bit of the top 100 finalizing or just another review. But remember, no matter whether you're getting trampled by an Annihilator or not, it's still only a game. See you next time, and take care.